Hello, and welcome to our third session of the TS2 SMB Azure Bootcamp. I'm Michael Copps, and I am a partner technology strategist for the TS2 team, part of the SMB&D org, which stands for Small and Mid-Sized Business and Distribution.
Yep, and my name is Todd Sweetser. I'm a partner technology strategist as well in the same TS2 organization. We focus exclusively with partners that are selling into the small and medium business space to make sure they have what they need to be successful from a pre-sales technical standpoint.
And in our third session today, we will be covering data backup in Azure. And in my experience with partners, a lot of questions on data backup, the Azure data backup service itself, and other options as well. So Todd, you'll be doing a majority of the presentation today. What have you been hearing from partners regarding data backup in Azure?
Well, data backup itself is important. They know it's important, but they really don't understand what Azure data backup and what the Azure backup solution is, because it is a solution that can be utilized. And many don't know that they can be utilized by on-prem infrastructure. It's called Azure Backup because it's backing up into the Azure cloud, right? So we'll talk about the different areas where it can be used and what it can back up. But then another thing they also ask about is, well, there's all these other third-party solutions, right? And it looks like some of them may be able to back up into Azure, and those are other options, many tools, and we'll talk about that. There's a lot of other tools out there that are using Azure storage as their cloud storage facility, but they may be in solutions that you may already be familiar with.
So you mentioned the Azure backup service and then using third-party tools like a Veeam, right? For example, to back up into Azure. Yep. When should a partner use one over the other?
You know, at the end of the day, it's what that particular opportunity requires and what they're comfortable with, in our opinion. A lot of partners are using third-party services, but they may not even be aware that these third-party services will actually back up to Azure at this point. They may be using them backing up to another on-prem hard drive or other backup services. So knowing that Azure is an option may be something they weren't even aware of. The Azure Backup tool definitely has its place, and we'll talk about what it brings to the table and how we can also help the customers out there, right? So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and get started on this particular session here. So, as mentioned, the title of the session is Tech Dive, Enhance Your Cloud Practice with Azure Backup. What we're going to be talking about today at a high level is the data protection challenges that exist out there to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. And then start to talk a little bit about Azure Backup, what it actually brings to the table and what its functionality serves. Talk about security, because that's definitely important to the customers, both partners yourselves and the customers. Security is always key with the cloud. While the cloud has become a lot more mainstream and people are definitely a lot more comfortable with it, sometimes perhaps getting a little too comfortable, they need to understand that security is definitely a part of Azure Backup to help alleviate those concerns. And then a good chunk of this session will actually be a demonstration and to show you that it's not complicated. It's fairly easy to set up Azure Backup and actually start using Azure Backup. And then we'll close with some next steps and resources. So moving forward, data protection challenges. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with slides like this, if not this one specifically, because this is a pretty common concern that people have. How to ensure that their data is going to be available, how to ensure that their data is backed up and always duplicated to ensure availability should something go wrong with wherever it's being held in its primary location. The amount of data out there is continuing to grow at phenomenal pace, right? So being able to ensure that our customers, especially our small business customers that are very sensitive to cost, if they lose a big chunk of data, it could cost them a lot of money. So being able to deal with those types of scenarios in a relatively easy way can be important. The cost of storage tend to grow, but one nice thing about Azure storage and Azure Backup is that something that you may have already seen is our costs, the charges for them have actually been going down. And this really has to do with scale, the ability to scale. Our data centers are all over the world, and we have the ability to scale out in such a large amount is that the cost can come down quite a bit. And we've already seen multiple times that we've had cost drop. And a lot of this has to do with competitive pressures. We will continue to be very competitive both from a technology standpoint and from a cost standpoint with cloud services, including storage, and specifically for this respect, the Azure Back-up infrastructure. But also being able to manage that complexity of all of that, make it a lot simpler. For a lot of our SMB customers today, they may be, many times they may not even be backing up or doing an adequate job, or they may be backing up to a USB drive or a thumb drive. But if it's integral to their business that they stay up, that's definitely not a recommended way of going. And being able to have a relatively easy way to at least provide a strong backup solution to those users, maybe something where Azure Backup would fit in that case. So let's talk a little bit about what Azure Backup is. It's really a simple server backup tool to the Azure cloud storage environment. Provides that off-site data protection. I talked about a second ago how people have local drives that they're backing up to. But if that entire building were to suffer some kind of damage, some type of destruction, they would lose it no matter what. It's much better to have your secondary backup, your backup data at an off-site location, right? So that's where Azure Backup can come into play. Your data is encrypted. I'll talk about this more momentarily, but making sure that data is encrypted in such a way that nobody else can get access to. We make a very efficient use of the network and the storage resources. The costs associated with Azure Backup, if you go to the Azure pricing calculator, as Mike talked about in the session 1, and if you go to the estimating backup cost, you'll see that the costs may be a little bit more than normal storage, but the costs include everything. They also, and that includes the bandwidth, the egress of data, which is normally charged when you're working with Azure. But it's all embedded into that cost with the Azure Backup cost and the Azure Backup solution. And the nice thing about it too is from a usability standpoint, you're using tools you're probably already familiar with. It's using the Microsoft backup tools with just add-ins to make it be able to actually back up into your Azure environment. Creates those cloud backup capabilities. So when would you potentially use Azure Backup? First and foremost to know, Azure Backup is a file system, VSS type of backup storage. So you're not going to be backing up an entire image per se. Now you can back up from Hyper-V like a VHD image up into Azure using this tool by itself, but it's not going to be a full backup of the word I'm looking for.
Bare metal.
Bare metal, that's all.
I say that because it's probably one of the most common questions.
Yeah, it's a very common question.
I first get from partners, can you do a bare metal backup? And the answer is no, but like Todd was saying, yeah, you can make a VHD copy with your own tools and then copy that file, that VHD file, up to Azure.
And that VHD could be a VM that's running in Azure as well. You would just capture it and bring it down. So there is ways around that to do that, but there may be other tools that make more sense in those scenarios. A couple other areas, though, where you definitely could choose it. When you're using System Data Center Protection Manager, DPM, many may be utilizing that for their backup infrastructure, you can actually, it'll plug right into that tool, plug right into that tool set, provide the UI and the steps in order to integrate. When you do use DPM in concert with Azure Backup, you get 120-day retention, and that's important to note because that's going to be different if you're just a small business or a branch office. Azure Backup will integrate right into Windows Server platforms, of course, 2012 R2, including Essentials, by the way. But you'll get a 30-day retention in that scenario. Many times that 30-day or even the 120-day isn't enough for some people, and that's where you would potentially look at some other solutions, which we'll talk about in just a moment. First thing I'm going to mention, though, is security. Probably the biggest and most important thing about the secure aspect of this is that your data is encrypted on your premises. You own the key, and you, maybe on behalf of your customer, would have the key. The data cannot be recovered without the key, and Microsoft would not have the key. So when it's encrypted on premises, when it gets go over the network, it's obviously continues to be encrypted, and it will continue to be encrypted when it's in the storage area within blob storage within the Azure environment. Hence, if anybody else were to somehow get access to it, there's no way they could do anything with it because they do not possess the key. Only you have the key. So in respect to some third-party options, and there's probably quite a few more than this, but a few quick searches, and I came up with a few that definitely exist that a lot of partners utilize. Veeam, which is a pretty popular solution in respect to backup and replication. They have a cloud edition now that it actually can back up directly into the Azure blob storage, as well as eVault. Two of the more popular, but I know there's quite a few others out there that exist. But if you weren't aware of it, I wanted to make sure you were aware of it, that you do have an option of backing up into Azure with these tools. Just make sure you know that that flexibility is there, and when the power and the maybe some of the more enterprise functionality that some of your larger SMBs may require, you may be using these, you do have options in respect to Azure with those. So with that, like I mentioned, the slideware was going to be kind of short today. We're going to get right into a demonstration and talk about how, and actually show, I should say, how to configure your server and how to get going, and then how to actually even go to the far steps of even doing a recovery using the backup, Azure Backup environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got a couple of virtual machines here at different levels of the backup scenario. This one doesn't have anything set up yet in respect. I haven't started using Azure Backup with it. One thing I'll point out too here, I'm in a virtual machine within Azure Infrastructure as a Service right now, and you may ask, why would I need to back those up? Right? And they're running in Azure, they should already be backed up. Now they are backed up through that geo-redundant persistence type of nature, but actual file level backup, if you need to do file level recovery, you'll still need to or may want to run backup tools within these types of virtual machines within this environment. So I'm going to go ahead and actually go through the process of setting that up. So I've got my Azure console here. That you may have seen in some of the other sessions, but I'm going to go to a different section here within here, and it's called Recovery Services. So Recovery Services, these are basically the storage components for an Azure Backup implementation. I've got a few already set up here, but I'm going to go through the process of actually setting one up new for purposes of this demonstration. So just like before, in some of the other sessions you've seen, on the lower left-hand corner, you click on New and Plus. It'll take you to Recovery Services. And in this case, I'm going to choose a Backup Vault, and I'm going to do a Quick Create. You'll notice there isn't a lot to this. The only option is Quick Create, because there's not a lot to worry about. Talked a little bit earlier about naming conventions in some of the other sessions, so I'm going to keep it along the same pace. Start it with a BV for Backup Vault. Delete this, just because I know I'm going to delete it after the demo's done. You can choose which region, and this could be important to you. You may want to put it in a different region than where for instance, if you're running infrastructure, if your virtual machines are in East, you may want to put this in West, just for your own safekeeping and making sure you know that it's in a completely separate area. But you definitely have flexibility on which data center where it's going to go, and then of course which subscription if you're working with multiple subscriptions within your Azure management tenant. So I'm going to click on Create Vault, and this actually won't take that long. It's just creating that actual storage account. Once that storage account is created, there's some further steps that we're going to go through that will actually, where you actually set up the actual vault to be able to be used by one or multiple servers for backup purposes. And while that's in the creation stage, what I'll do is I will start the process by just looking at one of these others. So this first screen here, these are the basic steps that you need to go through in order to initially set the machine up. The first thing you need to do is actually set up a certificate. And this can be a public certificate, or it can be a private self-signed certificate using, of course, MakeCert or other self-signed certificate tools. For purposes of this, I'm going to start the actual install of the agent first while that other one's getting set up to show you what that looks like. You'll see when I choose that, I can choose to download the agent for Windows Server or DPM, and there's a different agent for Server Essentials. Just due to the UI and Server Essentials is a little different. I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And at this point, it's just going to download and run the installer, and actually will install the agent against this machine. While that's coming up.
Todd, do you know which versions of Windows Server the agent runs on?
2012, 2012 R2, and I believe 2008 R2. So the other backup vault that I just created is complete, but let's go and continue with the installation of the agent so I can get that done. So you just go through the normal accepting the policies and the rules associated, the EULA, and it'll actually download the setup. One thing you'll note here, for purposes of this demonstration, we've already installed a lot of the prereqs, but if they didn't exist, you would actually have to go through and install these prerequisites. I'm going to go ahead and use the defaults for the installation folder in the cache, and then it'll actually proceed with the installation of the agent itself. While that's completing, actually I'll probably finished already. One thing after it's finished, the next thing it's going to do is actually check for any updates to the agent. So as you can see here, it actually is downloading and installing updates for that same agent as well. And now the agent is complete. So I'll click Finish. Next thing I'm going to go through is actually upload the certificate, the item 1 here. So you go into Manage Certificate, and this is where you're going to actually apply the certificate to the environment. Now we've already got some pre-built certificates already created, so I'll go ahead and select that certificate and apply it. And with that, it'll actually upload that certificate into the vault, and then its pair is locally on this machine here. Of course, this is going to be a machine that I would potentially back up, right? So I need to install that same certificate locally. So I'm going to choose a local machine. I can put the password in, which I believe I'll put it in a specific store. I want to make sure it goes into the personal store. Click Next and Finish, and it's as simple as that. The import is successful and the certificate is now there. So with that, you've actually done everything that you need to do within this user interface at this point. Now, if I look at some of these other vaults that are already created, I can go in and see if items have already been protected, if servers have already been backed up to them, and get a list of that right there, as well as a listing of the servers that have actually been connected with that certificate within that store. So I'm going to go ahead and start the actual Azure agent, Windows Azure Backup agent, just so you can see what that looks like. So this is when you first load the Azure Backup agent. It's in that familiar tool set that you've used many times. I'm going to click on Register Server. And the first thing it's going to do is pop up with a wizard. Of course, we've got a lot of wizards. I can set it up to go through a proxy server if need be. Set up the vault identification. This is where it's going to use that certificate. It's important to note that that certificate that I just implemented and uploaded and paired up is for authentication purposes. It verifies who you are. This particular certificate doesn't have anything to do with the actual encryption of the data. I'll show you that momentarily. So it's got that certificate that I already paired up on the machine and in the cloud. I'm going to use that new store that I just created, that recovery vault. Click on Next. And this is the important certificate in terms of encryption. You can create your own passphrase, or you can just have it manually generate a passphrase. But this passphrase is what you're going to need to recover any data. And this is the same passphrase that you could use on one or multiple machines if you want to use the same passphrase. It depends on your security requirements. Now you're going to want to save that passphrase, and not in a very secure manner for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go ahead and save it to the desktop. Then I'm going to click Register. And this is actually going to register this server with Windows Azure Backup. So it's going to create that pair. Now it's been successfully registered. Now it's set up the encryption key. And the passphrase has been saved to a local file on the desktop. If I click on this, I can open up that file. It's already open down here. So this is the important item. This is that passphrase. So this is what you're going to need if you ever need to actually recover any data that you back up from this server, or any server that you use that same passphrase.
So what I'm seeing, obviously, is the passphrase is important.
Did I say that?
As a best practice, it should be off-site, off-location of that on-premises backup, right? Because say if there's a fire or something and the complete site is just gone, you're not getting your data out of Azure unless you have that passphrase, correct?
Oh, yes. You're talking about the passphrase, yes.
Yeah. So,
like I said, I put it on my desktop. That's not where you're going to want to leave it.
But even on a secure server within that location, you probably want to keep that passphrase maybe even in multiple locations.
I would say multiple locations, a BitLocker USB
Azure,
drive.
Yeah, on Azure and then somewhere else.
Just make sure that you'd have access to it should you ever need to recover, which is just like any type of a backup scenario where you're having some sort of encryption. You need to have access to it. So that's how you actually get this all set up. Now I'm going to go to the, another demo environment. And this one actually, the reason I'm bringing this one up is this is one that's actually been working for a while already. So it's got some history. You can see what it looks like when backups have been proceeding. But I'll also go through what it looks like if you were actually going to schedule a backup. And I'll do that right now, actually. Well, before I do that, first you'll see on the UI itself, it's got a list of all the previous backup jobs, whether they've completed. If there were any errors, it would let you know of any errors potentially. Such as this past a couple weeks ago, we had a scenario where, in our demo environment, the vault we were using was deleted. So it was trying to back up, but it was error saying that the vault was actually deleted. It'll let you know the last backup, what all the available recovery points that may be within this particular on this particular server, and then the last recovery that you may have done from it. So if you were to set up schedule a backup, and in this case, go through the wizard to show what it looks like to actually schedule a backup. These are the dialogues you would go through. So initially, you would, in this case, since we're modifying it or stopping it, I'm going to just make some changes or go through the screens to show what it would take to change things. This is where you'd select the items. Remember, this is a file system based. Do note, though, that it's not uploading the full files every time. It is doing VSS, so it's doing differentials. So from a network bandwidth point of view, number one, the bandwidth costs are included in the cost. But also there's not going to require a lot of it after initial backups because it's just going to be taking care of the differences in the actual data. You can choose whatever items from a file setting point of view or folders and so on that you want to back up. One nice thing about this too, if it's important to you and you're running Windows Server Essentials, you can actually, of course, back up your clients into the Azure Backup environment from here as well. Of course, you've got the ability to set up exclusion rules. If there's media files or other large files that you don't need to be backed up, you can exclude them from the backup just like you would normally expect. Next is the actual time. This is where you specify the actual times of when your backups are going to occur. And you can set them up to 3 times a day, and that is the limit, 3 times a day. You can force backups manually if you need to, via PowerShell or just via the UI itself. But from a scheduling standpoint, up to 3 times a day, and of course you can choose however many days that you actually need. There are some properties that you can change as far as if there's a proxy, but this one can come into play in throttling. You can make it so it'll actually throttle down a little bit and not transport as much data at once if you have reasons within. Many of our customers in the small and medium business space may not have super powerful networks, and they may want to make sure that the network is being fully utilized, so they have some controls over throttling capabilities there. And then the retention setting. This is the one that is important. You have a choice of, in this case, this isn't DPM. If it was, we can go up to 120. But on the just individual server implementation, you can choose 7, 15, or 30-day retention policy. It'll keep backups up to 30 days, and then, of course, it's rolling for that time. You'll always be able to at least recover something within the last 30 days, and it could be, 3 backups at minimum or per day if need be as well. Then you make some confirmation, and then you can go through and actually finish this and clear it out. So that's basically the steps you would go through to schedule a backup on an individual server. So the next section I'm going to go through is actually how to actually recover data. Say that you've gotten to a point where some data may have been changed, but you want to get some previous versions, or for some disaster reason data has been destroyed and you need to recover it. This is the actual method to actually recover the data. You would actually come to the same console you were in before, but choose Recover Data. And you can choose to recover from this server or from another server if there's another server within that same, using that same certificate. In this case, we'll use this server. I can choose, of course, to search or browse for files. When I click Next here, it's going to select and show me the different volumes that have been backed up. And then it's going to fetch all the different recovery points, which again could be up to 30 times 3 at a minimum, unless you've even done some manual. In this case, it looks like we've got back about a week. So I can choose a recovery point, also choose a specific times associated with that particular day, choose next. Then I can choose the particular items that I want to actually recover. And I can browse through if there's some other specific items. I don't want the entire volume per se. I can actually get down to specific items that I want to actually say, I just want to bring back that apps directory that you see there. And then I can recover to the original location or to a secondary, a different location. And for purposes of the demonstration, I'm going to actually just recover the files to my desktop so you can see what it looks like. You do have some options when recovering too. If you can choose to create copies, so you have both versions. That's if you're going to the original location, or overwrite. So you've got some flexibility there as well as in respect to the access control list. You can actually restore any ACL permissions that may be associated with those files as well. So with that, I click recover. And it's just going to go through a process on the back end, and there's not a lot of files associated with this recovery, so it shouldn't take too long. But it's going to process all those files, bring them down, and then of course it's going to decrypt them locally. One thing that you didn't see here is that since I did it on the same machine, it didn't ask me for the actual certificate. If it had asked me for that certificate, such as if I was coming from a different machine, I would have had to have copied this certificate into that UI, and then it would have actually gone on and actually done the recovery. Since I actually didn't need that because it was on the same machine, it didn't prompt me for that certificate. So at this point, the data is actually downloaded. Everything associated with that apps directory, everything is all there. So it was very easy to actually recover that data.
So really quick, for ease of recovery in emergencies, it sounds like I earlier talked about the passphrase that we need to keep offsite. Would it also be helpful to keep those certificates as well?
Well, in this case, I use the term certificate, but that is the passphrase.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the one. This is the one that you want to actually keep, because this is the one that's doing that data level encryption between the 2 points.
Okay, I see.
So in summary, hopefully you've seen that this is definitely simple. It was not complex. Some of the previous sessions were probably a bit more complex than this. Tells you how simple our backup tool is, and it is backing up into Azure. So you've got the power of Azure, the power of that cloud storage behind you, making sure that that data is available. Do note I talk about geo-replication. This data is also geo-replicated. So when you back up into Azure, it's not just backed up into one place, but it is replicated across 2 different geographies, 6 different hard drives, so you can rest assured that your data is going to be there. Obviously, it makes it very convenient. It's off-site, but easily accessible. And again, the secure aspect, only you will have the key. And the nice thing about it, too, is, of course, it integrates directly with the Microsoft backup tools. We also talked a little bit about third-party options. And we know that this is not going to be the answer for everybody's backup needs. Definitely a lot of SMBs that maybe have very basic backup needs today or aren't doing any backup. It's a great way to get them started with it. But if you're already deep into it, there's definitely third-party solutions from eVault, from Veeam, and from others that will actually back up into the Azure environment. So from a kind of a closing resource point of view, I want to make sure everybody's familiar with something that's just rolling out called Cloud SureStep. And there's a page that's specifically on Azure. It's going to be and will be the one-stop site for everything from a partner point of view. This is a partner-specific resource to help educate you on every aspect, because we work at Microsoft. We know there's a lot of information out there. There's information overload out there. So the SMB and D org helped create this site. We helped, other people within the organization helped, to make sure that it's a one-stop shop for all of the information, and broken out into different stages too. You'll see the stages from right to left based on whether you're just starting, really getting into it and growing, or even starting to extend even other capabilities to optimize the business. So a lot of the things we went over today, and then also on the previous sessions, and we'll have data accessible from within this site. So with that, I mean, again, about a lot of information, short period of time. Hopefully it was helpful. Do you have any other information?
Just if I'm a partner currently selling Windows Server right now, Azure Backup seems to make a lot of sense, and it seems really easy to get started. In session 1, I talked about, what are our core solutions on Azure to easily get started. Azure Backup seems easier than anything. If you're selling Windows Server, especially Windows Server 2012 R2, because it's got that built-in Azure Backup solution right there in the backup client. And then if you're selling VMs on Azure, because it's the Azure platform, Azure Backup seems to make a lot of sense as well.
Oh yeah, and I would add to that too, that from a lot of places, this is one place within Azure that a lot of partners get their initial touch into Azure, because it is relatively low cost, low pain to get into it, easy to understand, and gets customers initially familiar with it. So with that, I guess.
Fantastic. I think that concludes our third session on backup, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next session about identity, our session 4.
Thanks everybody.
For joining.